We're in Esther chapter 4. Esther chapter 4 continues from chapter 3, where I had mentioned to you the last time that chapter 3 was very much the setting up of the entire core story of Esther. Haman managed to convince King Ahasuerus to make a decree, and was written down and sent out. And as you know, all decrees, like in chapter 1, cannot be cancelled. And so the decree was that in 11 months' time, on the same day, on that very same day, the 13th day of the 12th month, all Jews must be killed. And that was the news that's going round. Now, we don't know how long it has taken from chapter 3, end of chapter 3, into chapter 4. But by the time Mordecai learned, now the word learn comes from the word know. It's the same word. And why did the English translate as learn and not know? It's because know, the word know, encapsulates the discovery, the learning, the testing, and then the knowledge that's gained. And that is how know comes about. Know is not a mysterious thing. So nobody can know anything all of a sudden. You must have heard it, you must have discovered it, and so why is used, learned. But it actually means know. So when Mordecai knew all that happened, what happened about Haman, about the decree, but more about the Jews in that decree that they will be killed. And so they pay attention to this. He tore his clothes and then put on sackcloth and ashes, and then went out into the middle of the city. Now, we remember this is Shushan, right? Sackcloth and ashes are symbolic of grief, right? Of grief, of humility, and the moment you see the word sackcloth, don't think that it's our gunny sack, but the idea here is the same idea, that when people use the coarse cloth to hold grain, right? That would be how the Chinese did that, when they weave those very coarse and very tough cloth together to hold heavy grain. They also did that, and so it's also called sackcloth. It is not used for clothing. It is used for common heavy-duty work. So he put on sackcloth, and then he put on ashes. And then we were saying that this is ashes, not as in things that were burned, that is left over. This is the same word as how God made man in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. And God formed man out of the dust of the ground. So this is the dust, the fine earth, right? Called dust of the ground, ashes, right? They call it ashes. So these are things which is symbolic of common, worthless, no price, humility, basically. And so he put that on because it is a response of what he has learned, that it has impacted him so much. And then he went out to the middle of the city and he cried aloud. This is an interesting word. He actually cried. This is how the English native would say that he cried a cry that is great. That is how the Hebrew would use the word. He cried a cry that is great. Mainly, he let out a very huge moan, right? And it says that it was a bitter cry. And the cry is bitter. Bitter is the word mara. If you remember the wanderings of the wilderness, they came to the I think it's in Exodus chapter 17, where the water was bitter and they were angry with God. So that was mara, right? Bitter. And so this is an expression of the emotion. So you can see the Jewish people don't huddle up and lock up the door and be insignificant, right? To them, it is an expression. So he cried it out, and it was very sorrowful, and it is like mourning. Why is it that way? Because everything that he heard about Haman is a sad incident, because that is basically telling you that you maybe like you're gonna have cancer. You've got 11 months to go. You'll be dead by 11 months, and everybody would be very apprehensive. And so that is how Mordecai felt. And so he went as far as the front of the king's gate, and that is a palace gate, but nobody can go in if you are clothed with sackcloth, because it represents something that is not prominent, not happy, and it's not respectful. It shows that you are now somebody who is in pain, in grief, in mourning, very sad, and that kind of symbolism. But not only Mordecai, we see that in every province where the king's command and decree had arrived, there was great mourning amongst the Jews. They fasted, they weep, they wail, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes, just like Mordecai. So this is a very Hebrew practice. And this is very much a reference of all these. They fast. Fast means nothing going into the mouth. They weep and they cry as if they have lost something and they have lost hope. They wail because it is a grief. They wear sackcloth, it's symbolic, and ashes as things that is of no worth. So they are now representing that the Jewish people is feeling that they are worth nothing at all. Now comes verse 4. In verse 4, Esther's maids, so this would be the ladies who would serve Esther, and the eunuchs, remember these are all the officials. Maybe they're eunuchs, right? And they are the ones who protects her and serve her as well, the men and the women who serve the queen. Remember, Esther is now queen. Came to tell her, and she was deeply distressed. Now, this word distress is quite unusual. It is different from how Mordecai expressed it as in mourning. This would be in anguish and pain. It's like being tortured. Or maybe you could think of it as in giving birth. You know how when people give birth naturally, they have this pain that comes. So that is the expression, the distress. It's like she's being tortured and she's feeling so much pain. And then she sent garments to clothe Mordecai, to take his sackcloth away from him. But he would not accept them. Why? Because he is not in the mood of rejoicing. He is now in the mood of mourning. Because all of them will die. very soon. Verse 5. Esther called Hathach, right? Hathach, that's the name of one of these officials. And in fact, this is not just her official, it's the king's officials. Up here, this would be her eunuchs, and this would be the king's eunuchs, right? So there are enough eunuchs to go around, or enough officials. And he is the one that the king had appointed to serve her. And she gave him a command concerning Mordecai. Why? Is because why did Mordecai reject the clothes? To learn what and why he behaved this way. So verse 6, so Hathach went out to Mordecai in the city square, in the middle of the city, where he was in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him all that had happened to him. What had happened to him? Actually, it was not happening to him. He was just explaining why he's behaving this way, but more of what Haman had done. Haman had promised to put a lot of money into the king's treasury. And that's what we saw in chapter 3. Why? Because he had one agenda. It is to destroy the Jews. Now, the word destroy here, in verse 7, is the same word as perish. Right? Perish. Whosoever believes in him should not perish. Perish has the connotation in this chapter as well as in Psalm chapter 1 verse 6. If you read all through this chapter, you find that they would be having the idea that perish is to eventually be gone, to be no more, to have completely destroyed. So the word destroy is a good word to use, right? Now in verse 8, Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree, just to show the evidence. This is the decree that was posted in Shushan. I think you can remember that in the ancient China story, you find that when the king sends out information, they would print it on paper, they put it on paper to write it, or they draw it out. And this decree, they stick it on the walls. And so this is written and it has become a law. And this was what he may have taken off the wall and passed it to Esther, or to this person called Hathach, to pass it to Esther, that he might show it to Esther and explain to her what is happening. And that he, Hathach, might command her. Now this is where the core of the story is. To go into the king, to make supplication to him, and plead before him for her people. I need us to be very clear exactly what Haman actually means. Number one, to go in is to go to the presence of the king. Because that's the only way. If you don't go to the king and you go to the middleman or the officials, nothing happened. So he hoped that Hathach would tell her, go and see the king. So you notice here, it's to see the king. But there are two things, which are two similar things. Make supplication and plead. So, you know, the Hebrew people likes to say the same thing twice, slightly different, but really means the same thing. To see the king, to make an appeal. Now, the first one is to make supplication. Basically, is to see the king, to look for grace. Look for grace. Why? Because only when the king have grace in his eyes that he can do something. And so this is to come to the king, to seek the king, to look for favor with him. Grace or favor. Now, unfortunately, the English says make supplication, right? And then the second one is to plead. This one here is interesting. It is to, well, let's say, to make a request. That would be to plead. To request before the king, so in front of the king. So you can only do that if you're in the presence of the king. So Mordecai was hoping that Hathach would command Esther to go in front of the king and to look for favor or look for grace in the eyes of the king and request in front of the king for her people, the Jews. That was what Mordecai had wanted Esther to do. And so I hope that we are very clear on exactly what's happening. It is not just to go in and blabber and say things and defend. It is to look for grace. And so these are very interesting terms. Look for grace and plead and make requests for the Jews. These times when you meet up with the king Ahasuerus, then you should understand how Esther would feel. So Hathach returned and told Esther everything that Mordecai had asked. And so now we read the next segment. Esther told Hathach and gave him a command for Mordecai. The command that is this: all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court to the king. The inner court is where the king presides or sits on the throne, right? And so if he has not been called, there is only one law. So if you look at verse 11, there is only one law, one, echad, right? There is only one God. So here it says, there is only one law. And by law, this is not Torah, by the way, this is order. Just like Haman put the order of the king on paper, so there is only one order. And the order here is what? Put them to death. Except the one whom the king, there is an exception, except the one whom the king holds out the golden scepter. Now this is important for us to realize that there is such a thing called the golden scepter. The golden scepter is that stick that the king holds. So let me just briefly explain this to you. In the Hebrew, the word God, the word that is translated or commonly translated as God, is this word, El, which is represented by an ox head, and it is represented by a staff. Now, I'm just trying to show this to you so that you have a better understanding. An ox head and a staff. And so what this means is very simple. This is El, where we get Elohim. Elohim is plural, El is singular. And it basically means this: the ox head and a shepherd's staff. Ox head has horns. And this word literally means the mighty one, right? The mighty one, one of power. But where there is horns, right? And where there is a staff, what do we find in the king? The king would have a scepter. And the king would have a crown. And so what we do find is that kings is also called El or Elohim. Angels are called that because they have power. Certain individuals like Moses was called king. Judges were called El, right? And so Moses was an Elohim to the Pharaoh. And so this particular instance is useful for you to understand where the scepter and the crown came from. Is the Hebrew word for El, an ox head that is with horns, and the staff that he holds. So now I trust that we have a better understanding of this scepter, right? This scepter. So the king not only have the crown, all the kings have a scepter because he is an El, an Elohim. And so Esther was saying, if the king holds out the scepter, he may live. Otherwise, it's death. Now, I have not been called to go in to see the king for 30 days. Esther, as a queen, has not even gone in. And so Hathach went to see Mordecai. Now, I need you all to pay attention to verse 13 onwards. And these are the words of Mordecai. Remember, Mordecai is like a father to Esther. And so this is messages that's going back and forth, back and forth. And then Mordecai says, you tell this to Esther, right? Do not think in your heart that you will escape the king's palace any more than the other Jews. What is Mordecai saying? He says, just because you're in the king's palace, it won't protect you. Because the decree is about Jews. As long as you're a Jew, you will die. Doesn't matter whether you are in the king's palace or you're outside the king's palace. However, verse 14, if you remain completely silent at this time. Now, this is important. It's completely silent. Basically, it's an emphasis, right? These words here is an emphasis, completely silent, mainly to remain deaf at this time. That's what it means. If you are pretending to be dumb or deaf or you can't hear anything in this time, then relief. This word here is relief, help, and deliverance. It's the same word, right? Something is coming in to enlarge your space, and then deliverance would be an escape, right? This is an escape. This is to enlarge space. What is the significance? The significance is this. Haman's decree is to persecute, and persecute means to press, and to press together to a point where he will cut. Relief, in this sense, is to enlarge the space so you're not pressed together, and deliverance here means you can now run away. And so Mordecai is saying this. You can play deaf and ignore all these things. But what happens when something comes to rescue us for all the Jews from another place? Another place, don't know where, but not from you, basically. Essentially, you and your father's house will perish. Same thing, perish, to be destroyed, right? Yet, who knows? And this is the key phrase. Yet, who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time like this? Like what? And here, it literally means it has arrived for you to do something special, right? You have come to the king as such a time as this, a special occasion, a special opportunity. And so Mordecai is saying, you know what? You are now queen. You are the only one who can do this. So don't think that, isn't it, this is the best time to do something? If you're not the queen, then nobody can complain, but you are the queen. And you are about to die because you have to die on the 12th month on the 13th day, like everybody else. So Mordecai is saying, you can't escape either. So if you pretend to be deaf, somebody will come and save us. You will still die. But then who knows? Don't you think hard, Esther, that this occasion serves you? That you are the only one who can do something? This is a special time. And so Mordecai is not commanding her, but is giving her a choice. If you want to see us all die, it's on your hands. Then you will be guilty. But if you do something, and even if we die, then we all die together, basically. Verse 15 onwards, we have these words. Esther is convinced. She says, go tell Mordecai, this is what I want you all to do. All right? This is what I want you all to do. You go. Go is to walk. Walk to them. You must collect. The gather is collect. Collect all the Jews who are in Shushan. And I ask you to do one thing. It is to fast. For me, you notice the fasting here is not praying to. And so the entire Bible, the entire book of Esther, the entire book of Esther never really addressed Jehovah God. Even when Mordecai explained to her. And so Esther was saying, for all of you Jews who are present in Shushan, you must fast. And fast means close your mouth. So closed mouth would mean what? You don't eat and drink. For how long? 3 days. Night or day. Right? Basically, 3 days. So in these 3 days, prepare. Now, what would they do for 3 days not eating? Commonly, what you see in the book of Psalms, you would find that people actually cry out to God. But this text doesn't say anything like that. So we can only imply or infer from such behavior that they are seeking God. And then Esther told them, you know what? My mates and I, we will also fast in the same manner as everybody else. And so we're only talking about Shushan, right? And right after that, so you would see these words. And then it is after the 3 days. Then I will go into the king, which is against the law. And she knows. And so if I perish, I perish. What is perish? Destroyed. As all the Jews are going to be destroyed or perish, if I am destroyed earlier, then so be it. And so she had resolved in her heart that she will do this for her people. Conclusion is in verse 17. Mordecai went his way, did according to all that Esther had commanded him. So remember, Esther is the queen. Mordecai no longer can tell his daughter or his father's brother's daughter, whom he had taken as like a daughter, because she is now the queen. And so the queen now tells Mordecai, this is what I want you all to do. 3 days, 3 nights, don't eat anything, don't drink anything. And I will do the same. After that, we are all prepared. And what do they do? And like I said, I think they are praying. I think they're praying to God. After all, they are Jews. They're not praying to the idols. And so, interestingly, we see that the activity of what we call religious and spiritual activity is unspoken, not written out in the text. That is why the whole book of Esther does not contain the name of God, Jehovah, at all. And this is where we live in chapter 4, the story. And if Esther do this, many things can happen. She could be killed, she could be ignored, or she could get what she wants. But remember, Mordecai went to tell her to do two things, right? Go in and seek grace in the eyes of the king. And number two, to make requests for the Jews. So going to see the king is not buta, not unknown, just go in and wing it. There is a game plan. And the game plan is her life for her people. And so in this sense, you would see that she is playing the one who is like a Messiah, right? Like Cyrus from Persia was a Messiah to send the Jews home. These Jews haven't gone home, and now they are about to be exterminated in the whole kingdom. And Esther is the one that can or is in position to do something. All right, we will end here in chapter 4. Any questions?
When Mordecai actually asked Esther to go and see the king, Mordecai actually in his mind, he was thinking that the way he put it, as if Esther did not go in, somehow maybe the word God is not there mentioned, but the words that he said as if there will be another way of having the Jews being rescued. The way he put it.
He's saying
verse
that
14.
if she is completely silent, play deaf. If she plays deaf and dumb, well, maybe, relief and deliverance may come from another place. But it's not from her. And because of that, you and your father's house will be destroyed. So Mordecai doesn't know. But Mordecai, in his wisdom, he looked and says, actually, the only one who can save the Jews is Esther. And I mean, no Jew has the ear of the king.
Yeah, right.
So if not Esther, that's it. That is what I think Mordecai is saying. Yeah, Esther, you are the last hope of the Jews.
At the same place, at the same time.
At the right place, at the right time. All right.
Thanks, Pastor.